Good evening, and welcome to the Russ, Meek Speak show. Tonight's show will focus on Afghanistan, and this show is dedicated to the hundreds of thousands of men and women who served in the Afghanistan campaign and to those who made the ultimate sacrifice. For those too young or too old to remember the events of 9/11, September 2001, the following video of events in New York for that day might refresh your memory.
September 11th, 2001, Logan International Airport, Boston, Massachusetts. 7:59 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. American Airlines Flight 11 takes off from Boston to Los Angeles International Airport with 92 people on board. 81 passengers, 11 crew members, and 5 hijackers. 8:13 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Air traffic controllers in Boston Center try to make contact with American Airlines Flight 11.
American 11, climb maintain level 350. American 11, Boston. Earth 7, Mike Lima, how do you hear?
Mike Lima, has you loud and clear.
American 11, Boston.
This is Adam.
This is Boston. I tried American 20 left and I was going to climb him. He will not respond to me now.
Looks like he's turning right.
Yeah, I turned him 20 right.
Oh, okay.
And he's only going to, I think, 29.
Okay.
Well,
sure, that's fine.
But
he
I'm
won't
not
answer you.
talking to him.
He's Nordo. Roger.
All right.
Thanks.
American 11, if you hear Boston Center, ident please or acknowledge.
8:14 a.m. Eastern Time, Logan International Airport, Boston, Massachusetts. Plane 2, United Airlines Flight 175. United Airlines Flight 175 departs from Logan International Airport in Boston for Los Angeles International Airport, carrying 56 passengers, 9 crew members, and 5 hijackers. 8:14 a.m. Eastern Time. American Airlines Flight 11 deviates from its scheduled path. 8:21 a.m. Eastern Time. American Airlines Operations Specialist Nydia Gonzalez reports the hijacking.
American Airlines emergency line, please state your emergency.
Hey, this is Nydia, American Airlines calling. I am monitoring a call in which Flight 11, the flight attendant is advising our reps that the pilot, everyone's been stabbed.
Flight 11?
Yep. They can't get into the cockpit is what I'm hearing.
8:24 a.m. Eastern Time. Flight 11 hijacker contacts the Boston air traffic controllers.
30 minutes, 67.0.
Is that American 11 trying to call?
Buddy, we have some planes. Just stay quiet and you'll be okay. We're turning to the airport. 15 Southwest of Bono going to Hampton.
And who's trying to call me here? American 11, are you trying to call?
Nobody move. Everything will be okay. If you try to make any move, you'll injure yourself and the airplane. Just stay quiet.
8:37 a.m. Eastern Time. Air traffic controller from Boston Center Joseph Cooper calls the North American Aerospace Defense Command. Alerts them of a suspected hijacking of American 11.
Rogers Weapons, Sergeant Powell.
Hi, Boston Center Team U. We have a problem here. We have a hijacked aircraft headed towards New York, and we need you guys to, we need someone to scramble some F-16s or something up there to help us out.
Is this real world or exercise?
No, this is not an exercise, not a test.
Okay, hey, hold on one second, okay?
Yes.
Northeast Air Defense Sector, New York, called on F-15 fighter jets to intercept. Sarge Jeremy W. Powell ordered 2 pilots to take off, without knowing where to send the fighter jets. The hijackers had turned the plane's responder off.
He's being hijacked. The pilot's having a hard time talking to the... we don't know. We don't know where he's going. He's heading towards Kennedy. He's, like I said, he's like 35 miles north of Kennedy now at 367 knots.
Okay.
No idea where he's going or what he's...
8:46 a.m. Eastern Time. American Airlines Flight 11 crashes into the World Trade Center North Tower. (9:01 a.m. Eastern Time). United Airlines 175 is reported to have been hijacked. Federal Aviation Administration at the New York Center instructs the command center to alert the military immediately. 9:02 a.m. Eastern Time. Air traffic controllers at New York Center spot the United 175 flight.
Hey, can you look out your window right now?
Yeah.
Can you see a guy at about 4,000 feet, about 5 east of the airport right now? Looks like he's...
Yeah, I see him.
You see a guy, look, is he descending for the building also?
He's descending really quick, too, yeah.
Well, that's
2,500 feet now. He just dropped 800 feet in like one sweep.
That's another situation. What kind of airplane is that? Can you guys tell?
I don't know. I'll read it out in a minute. Another one just hit the building.
Wow. Wow.
Another one just hit it hard.
Another one just hit the World Trade.
9:03 a.m. Eastern Time. United 175 crashes into World Trade Center South Tower.
The whole building just came apart.
Holy smokes. All right, I guess you guys can be busy.
I was somewhere between 74 and 72 in that stairwell when the second plane went through our building. So we were just a few floors below the strike zone. Never felt anything like that in my life. That building, that fire stairwell that we're inside, this concrete bunker starts to shake so violently back and forth. The handrails breaking away from the wall.
9:05 a.m. Eastern Time. Emma E. Booker Elementary School, Sarasota, Florida. President George W. Bush is on a scheduled visit to an elementary school in Florida. White House Chief of Staff Andrew Card whispers to the president.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a difficult moment for America. I, unfortunately, will be going back to Washington after my remarks.
9:11 a.m. Eastern Time. Plane 3, American Airlines 77. Federal Aviation Administration is notified about a third hijacking, American Airlines 77. It took off from Washington Dulles International Airport, bound for Los Angeles International Airport. On board were 58 passengers, 6 crew members, and 5 hijackers.
American Dispatch, Jim McDonald.
Indianapolis Center, did you get a hold of American 77 by chance?
No, sir, but we have an unconfirmed report that the second airplane hit the World Trade Center.
Say again?
Yes, we were hijacked, which is a Boston LA flight, and 77 is a Dulles LA flight. And we have an unconfirmed report a second airplane just flew into the World Trade Center.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
9:28 a.m. Eastern Time. Plane 4, United Airlines Flight 93. 37 passengers, 7 crew members, 4 hijackers. The fourth hijack is reported. United Airlines Flight 93 gets hijacked above northern Ohio. It's seen turning towards the southeast. Sounds of struggle are heard in a transmission from United 93.
United 93, that traffic for you is 1 o'clock, 12 miles eastbound 370.
Negative contact, we're looking, United 93.
Somebody call Cleveland?
Roger, American 1060 with you. We're 370. We're slowing due to the delays possible going eastbound.
That's American 1060.
You got United 93? United 93. Stop the Chardonnay, it's descended.
Two flights are seen rapidly heading towards Washington, D.C. Identification technicians at the Northeast Air Defense Sector try to inform Washington.
American 11 is not the aircraft that crashed. It is still airborne. Did you get that information? That's what we just found out. We don't know where it is, though. It's headed towards Washington was the last known information.
Washington better get on the move.
Right. And I don't know, but somebody's got to get the president going. This is not good.
They better start looking for this.
9:32 a.m. Eastern Time. A hijacker on United 93 is heard on the radio.
They got them beats down. Keep remaining steady. We have them all aboard. So it's
Calling Cleveland Center, you're unreadable. Say again slowly.
9:32 a.m. Eastern Time, Federal Aviation Administration informs the military about a missing American 77 flight.
Okay. But again, remember, nothing has been confirmed as far as which aircraft have hit the World Trade Center, but the other one we have is information headed towards Washington.
Okay, let me tell you this. We were looking, we're also lost American 77.
9:37 a.m. Eastern Time, American Airlines Flight 77 crashes into the Pentagon. Violent fire erupts at the western side of the Pentagon.
I knew it was terrorists. I mean, that was not hard to think about. But the idea of a plane being used as a weapon, and how that would happen, and how that could happen in this area, that just was a little bit hard to fathom.
9:45 a.m. Eastern Time, United States airspace shuts down. All operating aircraft are ordered to land at the nearest airport. (9:59 a.m. Eastern Time). 56 minutes after crash, World Trade Center South Tower collapses.
Going to die.
10:03 a.m. Eastern Time, United 93 crashes at Shanksville, Pennsylvania. The fourth hijacked plane, Flight 93, crashed in Pennsylvania after the passengers took over the hijackers. 10:28 a.m. Eastern Time, 1 hour 42 minutes after crash. World Trade Center North Tower collapses.
The 92nd floor, and actually when the plane hit, she was on the phone with her fiancé, Al, in Chicago, describing the view of the Statue of Liberty.
Hard day and a hard week, and that also changed the trajectory of my life.
8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. U.S. President George W. Bush addresses the nation.
Our very freedom came under attack. Today our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature. And we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. America and our friends and allies join with all those who want peace and security in the world, and we stand together to win the war against terrorism.
2,977 killed, 2,605 U.S. citizens.
We crashed! The other trade center's down! It's down! It's down!
372 non-U.S. citizens, 344 firefighters, 71 law enforcement officers, 19 hijackers, over 6,000 injured.
Hard to watch after 20 years. Next, we will hear from President George Bush's commemoration of the 20-year anniversary of 9/11 from Shanksville, Pennsylvania.
20 years ago, we all found in different ways, in different places, but all at the same moment, that our lives would be changed forever. The world was loud with carnage and sirens, and then quiet with missing voices that would never be heard again. These lives remain precious to our country and infinitely precious to many of you. Today we remember your loss, we share your sorrow, and we honor the men and women you have loved so long and so well. For those too young to recall that clear September day, it is hard to describe the mix of feelings we experienced. There was horror at the scale of destruction, and awe at the bravery and kindness that rose to meet it. There was shock at the audacity of evil, and gratitude for the heroism and decency that opposed it. In the sacrifice of the first responders, in the mutual aid of strangers, in the solidarity of grief and grace, the actions of an enemy revealed the spirit of a people, and we were proud of our wounded nation. In these memories, the passengers and crew of Flight 93 must always have an honored place. Here, the intended targets became the instruments of rescue, and many who are now alive owe a vast, unconscious debt to the defiance displayed in the skies above this field. It would be a mistake to idealize the experience of those terrible events. All that many people could initially see was the brute randomness of death. All that many could feel was unearned suffering. All that many could hear was God's terrible silence. There are many who still struggle with a lonely pain that cuts deep within. In those fateful hours, we learned other lessons as well. We saw that Americans were vulnerable, but not fragile. That they possess a core of strength that survives the worst that life can bring. We learned that bravery is more common than we imagined, emerging with sudden splendor in the face of death. We vividly felt how every hour with our loved ones was a temporary and holy gift, and we found that even the longest days end. Many of us have tried to make spiritual sense of these events. There is no simple explanation for the mix of providence and human will that sets the direction of our lives. But comfort can come from a different sort of knowledge. After wandering long and lost in the dark, many have found they were actually walking step by step toward grace. As a nation, our adjustments have been profound. Many Americans struggled to understand why an enemy would hate us with such zeal. The security measures incorporated into our lives are both sources of comfort and reminders of our vulnerability. And we have seen growing evidence that the dangers to our country can come not only across borders, but from violence that gathers within. There is little cultural overlap between violent extremists abroad and violent extremists at home. But in their disdain for pluralism, in their disregard for human life, in their determination to defile national symbols, they are children of the same foul spirit, and it is our continuing duty to confront them. After 9/11, millions of brave Americans stepped forward and volunteered to serve in the armed forces. The military measures taken over the last 20 years to pursue dangers at their source have led to debate. But one thing is certain: we owe an assurance to all who have fought our nation's most recent battles. Let me speak directly to veterans and people in uniform. The cause you pursued at the call of duty is the noblest America has to offer. You have shielded your fellow citizens from danger. You have defended the beliefs of your country and advanced the rights of the downtrodden. You have been the face of hope and mercy in dark places. You have been a force for good in the world. Nothing that has followed, nothing, can tarnish your honor or diminish your accomplishments. To you and to the honored dead, our country is forever grateful. In the weeks and months following the 9/11 attacks, I was proud to lead an amazing, resilient, united people. When it comes to the unity of America, those days seem distant from our own. Malign force seems at work in our common life that turns every disagreement into an argument, and every argument into a clash of cultures. So much of our politics has become a naked appeal to anger, fear, and resentment. That leaves us worried about our nation and our future together. I come without explanations or solutions. I can only tell you what I've seen. On America's day of trial and grief, I saw millions of people instinctively grab for a neighbor's hand and rally to the cause of one another. That is the America I know. At a time when religious bigotry might have flowed freely, I saw Americans reject prejudice and embrace people of Muslim faith. That is the nation I know. At a time when nativism could have stirred hatred and violence against people perceived as outsiders, I saw Americans reaffirm their welcome to immigrants and refugees. That is the nation I know. At a time when some viewed the rising generation as individualistic and decadent, I saw young people embrace an ethic of service and rise to selfless action. That is the nation I know. This is not mere nostalgia. It is the truest version of ourselves. It is what we have been and what we can be again. 20 years ago, terrorists chose a random group of Americans on a routine flight to be collateral damage in a spectacular act of terror. The 33 passengers and 7 crew of Flight 93 could have been any group of citizens selected by fate. In a sense, they stood in for us all. The terrorists soon discovered that a random group of Americans is an exceptional group of people facing an impossible circumstance. They comforted their loved ones by phone, braced each other for action, and defeated the designs of evil. These Americans were brave, strong, and united in ways that shocked the terrorists, but should not surprise any of us. This is the nation we know. And whenever we need hope and inspiration, we can look to the skies and remember. God bless.
Thank you, George Bush. Next, United Kingdom Prime Minister Tony Blair offers poignant comment and thoughtful insight on a role in Afghanistan, suggesting U.S. leadership might have thought things through. Mr. Blair can't be here today, but I'm going to speak from his text. Tony Blair, why we must not abandon the people of Afghanistan for the sake and ours. The abandonment of Afghanistan and its people is tragic, dangerous, unnecessary, not in their interest and not in ours. In the aftermath of the decision to return Afghanistan to the same group from which the carnage of 9/11 rose, and in a manner that seems almost designed to parade our humiliation, the question posed by allies and enemies alike is, has the West lost its strategic will? Meaning, is it able to learn from experience, think strategically, define our interests strategically, and on that basis, commit strategically? Is long-term a concept we are still capable of grasping? Is the nature of our politics now inconsistent with the assertion of our traditional global leadership role? And do we care? As a leader of our country, when we took the decision to join the United States in removing the Taliban from power, and who saw the high hopes we had of what we could achieve for the people and the world subside under the weight of bitter reality, I know better than most how difficult the decision of leadership are, and how easy it is to be critical and how hard to be constructive. Almost 20 years ago, following the slaughter of 3,000 people on U.S. soil on September 11, 2001, the world is in turmoil. The attacks were organized out of Afghanistan by al-Qaeda, an Islamic terrorist group given protection and assistance by the Taliban. We forget this now, but the world was spinning on its axis. We feared further attacks, possibly worse. The Taliban were given an ultimatum: yield up the al-Qaeda leadership or be removed from power so that Afghanistan could not be used for further attacks. They refused. We felt there was no safer alternative for our security than keeping our word. We held out the prospect, backed by substantial commitment, of turning Afghanistan from a failed terror state into a functioning democracy on the mend. It may have been a misplaced ambition, but it was not an ignoble one. There is no doubt that in the years that followed, we made mistakes, some serious, but the reaction to our mistakes has been, unfortunately, further mistakes. Today, we are in the mood that seems to regard the bringing of democracy as utopian delusion, an intervention, virtually of any sort, as a fool's errand. The world is now uncertain of where the West stands because it is obvious that the decision to withdraw from Afghanistan in this way was driven not by grand strategy, but by politics. We didn't need to do it. We chose to do it. We did it in the obedience to the imbecilic political slogan about ending the forever wars, as if our engagement in 2021 was remotely comparable to our commitment 20 or even 10 years ago, and in circumstances in which troop numbers had declined to a minimum and no Allied soldiers had lost their life in combat for 18 months. We did it in the knowledge that though worse than imperfect and though immensely fragile, There were real gains over the past 20 years. And for anyone who disputes that, read the heartbreaking laments from every section of Afghan society as to what they will fear now be lost. Gains in living standards, education, particularly of girls, gains in freedom. Not nearly what we hoped for or wanted, but not nothing. Something worth defending, worth protecting. We did it when the sacrifices of our troops had made those fragile gains our duty to preserve. We did it when the February 2020 agreement itself, replete with concessions to the Taliban, by which the U.S. agreed to withdraw if the Taliban negotiated a broad-based government and protected their civilians, had been violated daily and derisively. We did it with every jihadist group around the world cheering. Russia, China, and Iran will see and take advantage. Anyone given commitments by Western leaders will understandably regard them as unstable currency. We did it because our politics seem to demand it. And that's the worry of our allies and the source of rejoicing in those who wish us ill. They think Western politics is broken. Unsurprisingly, therefore, friends and foes ask, is this a moment when the West is in an epoch-changing retreat? I can't believe we are in such a retreat, but we are going to have to give tangible demonstration that we are not. This demands an immediate response in respect of Afghanistan, and then measured and clear articulation of where we stand for the future, our future. We must evacuate and give sanctuary to those whom we have responsibility, those Afghans who helped us, stood by us, and have a right to demand we stand by them. There must be no repetition of arbitrary deadlines. We have a moral obligation to keep at it until all those who need to be are evacuated. And we should do so not grudgingly, but out of a deep sense of humanity and responsibility. We need then to work out a means of dealing with the Taliban and exerting maximum pressure on them. This is not as empty as it seems. We have given up much of our leverage, but we retain some. The Taliban will face every difficult decision and likely deeply divided over them. The country, its finances, and public sector workforce are significantly dependent on aid, notably from the U.S., Japan, the U.K., and others. The average age of the population is 18. A majority of Afghans have known freedom and not known the Taliban regime. They will not all conform quietly. The UK, as the current G7 chair, should convene a contact group of the G7 and other key nations and commit to coordinating help to the Afghan people and holding the new regime to account. NATO, which has had 8,000 troops present in Afghanistan alongside the US, and Europe should be brought fully into cooperation under this grouping. We need to draw up a list of incentives, sanctions, and actions we can take, including to protect the civilian population so the Taliban understand their choices will have consequences. This is urgent. The disarray of the past weeks need to be replaced by something resembling coherence and with a plan that is credible and realistic. But then we must answer that overarching question. What are our strategic interests, and are we prepared any longer to commit to upholding them? Compare the Western position with that of President Putin when the Arab Spring convulsed the Middle East. In North Africa, toppling regime after regime, he perceived that Russia's interests were at stake. In particular, in Syria, he believed that Russia needed Assad to stay in power, while the West hesitated and then finally achieved the worst of all worlds, refusing to negotiate with Assad, but not doing anything to remove him, even when he used chemical weapons against his own people. Mr. Obama, Putin committed. He has spent 10 years in open-ended commitment, And though he was intervening to prop up a dictatorship and we were intervening to suppress one, he, along with the Iranians, secured his goal. Likewise, though, we removed the Gaddafi government in Libya. It is Russia, not us, who has influence over the future. Afghanistan was hard to govern all through the 20 years of our time there. And of course, there were mistakes and miscalculations. But we shouldn't dupe ourselves into thinking it was ever going to be anything other than tough. When there was an internal insurgency combining with external support, in this case, Pakistan, to destabilize the country and thwart its progress. Remember where we found Osama bin Laden? Pakistan. The Afghan army didn't hold up once U.S. support was canceled, but 60,000 Afghan soldiers gave their lives. And any army would have suffered a collapse in morale when effective air support vital for troops in the field was scuttled by the overnight withdrawal of maintenance. There was endemic corruption in government, but there were also good people doing good work to the benefit of the people. You can read there's an excellent summary of what we got right and wrong from General Petraeus in his New Yorker interview a few weeks ago. It has often dashed our hopes, but it was never hopeless. Despite everything, if it mattered strategically, it was worth persevering, provided that the cost was not inordinate, and here it wasn't. If it matters, you go through the pain, even when you are rightly disheartened. You can't lose heart completely. Your friends need to feel it, and your foes need to know it, if it matters. So, does it? Is what is happening in Afghanistan part of a picture that concerns our strategic interest and engages them profoundly? Some would say no. We have not heard another attack on the scale of 9/11, though no one knows whether that is because of what we did post 9/11 or despite it. You could say that terrorism remains a threat, but not one that occupies the thoughts of a lot of our citizens, certainly not to the degree in the years following 9/11. You could see different elements of jihadism as disconnected with local cause and containable with modern intelligence. I would still argue that even if this were right, and the action in removing the Taliban in November 2001 was unnecessary, the decision to withdraw was wrong. But it wouldn't make this a turning point in geopolitics, but let me make the alternative case, that the Taliban is part of a bigger picture that should concern us strategically. The 9/11 attack exploded into our conscience because of its severity and horror. But the motivation for such an atrocity arose from the ideology, many years in development. I will call it radical Islam, for want of a better term. As a research paper shortly to be published by my institute shows, this ideology in different forms and with varying degrees of extremism has been almost 100 years in gestation. Those religions that profess to love God and hate man, this is one of them. Its essence is the belief that Muslim people are disrespected and disadvantaged because they are oppressed by outside powers and their own corrupt leadership. And that, the answer lies in Islam returning to its roots, creating a state based not on nations, but on religion, with society and politics governed by a strict and fundamentalist view of Islam. It is the turning of the religion of Islam into a political ideology and, of necessity, an exclusionary and extreme one, because in a multi-faith and multicultural world, it holds there is only one true faith, and we should all conform to it. We're infidels, right? Over the past decade, and well before 9/11, it was gaining in strength. The 1979 Iranian Islamic Revolution and its echo in the failed storming of the Grand Mosque in Mecca in late 1979 massively boosted the forces of this radicalism. The Muslim Brotherhood became a substantial movement. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan saw jihadism rise. The Soviet Union did it. In time, other groups have sprung up: Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and many others. Some are violent, some not. Sometimes they fight each other. But at other times, as with Iran and Al-Qaeda, they cooperate, but all subscribe to basic elements of the same ideology. Today, there is a vast process of destabilization going on in this Sahel, the group of countries across the northern part of sub-Saharan Africa. This will be the next wave of extremism and immigration that will inevitably hit Europe. My institute works in many African countries. Barely a president I know does not think this is a huge problem for them, and for something it is becoming the problem. Iran uses proxies like Hezbollah to undermine moderate Arab countries in the Middle East. Lebanon is teetering on the brink of collapse. Turkey has moved increasingly down the Islamist path in recent years. In the West, we have sections of our own Muslim communities radicalized. Even more moderate Muslim nations such as Indonesia and Malaysia have, over a period of decades, seen their politics become more Islamic in the practice and discourse. Look no further than Pakistan's Prime Minister congratulating the Taliban on their victory, to see that, although, of course, many of those espousing Islamism are opposed to violence, they share ideological characteristics with many of those who use it, and a worldview that is constantly presenting Islam as under siege from the West. Islamism is a long-term structural challenge because it is an ideology utterly inconsistent with modern societies based on tolerance and secular government. Yet Western policymakers can't even agree to call it radical Islam. We prefer to identify it as a set of disconnected challenges, each to be dealt with separately. If we did define it as a strategic challenge, and we saw it in a whole and not as parts, we would never have taken the decision to pull out of Afghanistan. We are in the wrong rhythm of thinking in relation to radical Islam. With revolutionary communism, we recognize it as a threat of a strategic nature, which required us to confront it both ideologically and with security measures. It lasted more than 70 years. Throughout that time, we would have never dreamt of saying, well, we have been at this for a long time, we should just give up. We knew we had to have the will, the capacity, and the staying power to see it through. There were different arenas of conflict and engagement, different dimensions, varying volumes of anxiety as the threat ebbed and flowed. But we understood it was a real menace, and we combined across nations and parties to deal with it. This is what we need to decide now with radical Islam. Is it a strategic threat? If so, how do those opposed to it, including with Islam, combine to defeat it? We have learned the parallels of intervention in the way we intervened in Afghanistan, Iraq, and indeed Libya. But non-intervention is also policy with consequence. What is absurd is to believe the choice is between what we did in the first decade after 9/11 and the retreat we are witnessing now. To treat our full-scale military intervention of November 2001 as of the same nature as the secure and support mission in Afghanistan of recent times. Intervention can take many forms. We need to do it learning the proper lessons of the past 20 years, according not to our short-term politics, but our long-term strategic interest. In Afghanistan, there's a proverb. You have all the clocks, we have all the time. We didn't take our time there. We didn't spend the time, and this is the result. But the intervention requires commitment, not time limited by political timetables, but by obedience to goals. For Britain and the U.S., these questions are acute. The absence of across-the-aisle consensus and collaboration and the deep politicization of foreign policy and security issues is visibly atrophying United States power. And for Britain, out of Europe and suffering the end of the Afghanistan mission by our greatest ally with little or no consultation, we have serious reflection to do. We don't see it yet, but we are at risk of relegation to second division of global powers. Maybe we don't mind, but we should at least take the decision deliberately. There are, of course, many other important issues in geopolitics: COVID-19, climate, the rise of China, poverty, disease, and development. But sometimes an issue comes to mean something not only in its own right, but as a metaphor, as a clue to the state of things and the state of peoples. If the West wants to shape the 21st century, it will take commitment. Through thick and thin, when it's rough as well as easy, making sure allies have confidence and opponents caution, accumulating a reputation for constancy and respect for the plan we have and the skill in its implementation. It will require parts of the right and politics to understand that isolation in an interconnected world is self-defeating, and parts of the left to accept that intervention can sometimes be necessary to uphold our values. It requires us to learn lessons from the 20 years since 9/11 in a spirit of humility and the respective exchange of different points of view, but also with a sense of rediscovery that we in the West, representing values and interests worth being proud of and defending. And that commitment to those values and interests needs to define our politics, and not our politics define our commitment. This is a large strategic question posed by these last days of chaos in Afghanistan, and on the answer will depend the world's view of us and our view of ourselves. Next, we'll hear comments from Henry Kissinger, U.S. Secretary of State under Richard M. Nixon, and his appraisal of our role and obligation to Afghanistan and the world. Mr. Kissinger states, "The Taliban invasion of Afghanistan raises the urgent need to evacuate tens of thousands of Americans and allies who are trapped across the country. Rescuing them must be our urgent priority. Our fundamental concern, however, must be a question: how did America find itself compelled to withdraw into a decision that was taken without warning or consultation with allies and peoples who were involved in 20 years of sacrifice in Afghanistan? And why is the solution in Afghanistan presented as a solution between occupation or total withdrawal from the country? An essential phenomenon has plagued our efforts to suppress, say, the Vietnam-Iraq insurgency for more than a generation. When America risks the lives of its soldiers, puts its prestige in the pan, including other countries, it must do so on the basis of a combination of strategic and political objectives. Strategically, to make clear the conditions in which it is fought, and politically, in defining the governance framework to guarantee the outcome of the intervention both domestically and internationally. The United States has divided itself in its efforts to fight the insurgency due to its inability to set achievable goals and link them in a harmonic way to the domestic political process in America. Military objectives have become very absolute and unattainable, while political objectives are abstract and changeable. The failure to link these two components to each other has led to America getting involved in conflicts without an endpoint, a conclusion, and this has caused division within the country between each other, as well as sparked a stream of debates, quite vigorous. We entered Afghanistan with strong public support to respond to al-Qaeda's attack on America's soil that was orchestrated by Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. The initial military campaign was very successful. The Taliban managed to survive in only a few areas in Pakistan again, from where they organized uprising and resistance, even with the help of the Pakistan authorities. But as the Taliban were leaving the country, we lost strategic focus. We were convinced that our goal of stopping the institution of terrorism bases could only be achieved by transforming Afghanistan into a modern state with democratic institutions and a government with a constitutional mandate. This venture did not have a timeline to be able to match the political processes in America. In 2010, in an op-ed I wrote in response to the growing troop presence there, I warned that prolonging that lengthy intervention process would turn non-jihadist Afghans against us. Afghanistan has never been a modern state. State status presupposes a sense of shared obligation and centralization of authority. Afghan soil, rich in many elements, lacks this aspect. Building a modern democratic state in Afghanistan where government decisions are uniformly implemented throughout the country means staying there for many years, even decades, as this goes against the geographical and ethno-religious essence of the country. It was precisely the fragmentation of Afghanistan and the lack of central authority that made it an attractive place for terrorists. Although a separate Afghan entity can be found since the 18th century, its constituent peoples have always resisted centralization. The military and especially political consolidation of Afghanistan has taken place on ethnic and clan basis in a feudal structure where the main mediating forces are the organizers of the clan military defenses. As is usually the case in protracted conflict over time, clan military chiefs joined in a broad coalition when an outside force, such as the British Army in 1839 and the Soviet Army in 1979, tended to invade and impose the country. Centralization and coherence in government. Even the chaotic withdrawal of Britain from Kabul in 1842, which a single European managed to escape alive from death, or captivity, or even the great withdrawal of the Soviets in 1989 from Afghanistan, all happened due to temporary mobilization of clans. The contemporary argument as to why the Afghan people are not willing to fight with compatriots is not supported by history. They fought with devotion for the clans and their tribal autonomy. Over time, the war took the form of previous campaigns to neutralize terrorist threats, where the confidence of the indigenous people population progressively declined over time and the Americans' further stay in their country. The destruction of Taliban bases was achieved, but building a state in a war-torn country requires a large military force. The Taliban can be isolated, but not eliminated. It sounds a little like COVID. And promoting non-familiar forms of government, a government weakened politics and increased rampant corruption. Afghanistan repeated previous behavior of internal strife. When progress was made on the side of fighting terrorism, we had disaster on the side of political progress. One target seemed to paralyze the other across successive administrations by both parties. An example is the 2009 decision to increase the U.S. troop presence in Afghanistan, along with the announcements that the Americans would withdraw within 18 months. What was overlooked was the possibility of combining objectives that would be achieved. The terrorist insurgency could have been reduced with the isolation rather than the complete elimination of the Taliban, while political diplomatic progress could have been made, taking into account particular aspects of the Afghan reality, the fact that its neighbors, even hostile states, or with us several times, feared the terrorist potential of the Afghans. Would it be possible to coordinate some anti-terrorist efforts with them? Of course, India, China, Russia, and Pakistan have different interests. Creative diplomacy could have created a package of measures that would have allowed overcoming the terrorist threat in Afghanistan. This strategy was the way Britain defended its conquest in the Middle East from Indian expansion for a century without having troops or bases in place, but simply keeping allies in the region that maintained the balance of power. But this alternative was never explored. While campaigning against the war, President Donald Trump and Joe Biden negotiated peace with the Taliban, the destruction of which we and our allies had vowed to achieve 20 years ago. These negotiations culminated in the unconditional withdrawal of the United States from the Biden administration. Describing the evolution of the situation until it reaches this point does not eliminate the fact how cruel and, above all, unexpected was the decision to withdraw. America cannot accept the fact that it is the primary component of the international order because of its historical capabilities and its values. He cannot avoid this responsibility by withdrawing how to fight, limit, and overcome terrorism, backed by states that have an ever-growing idea of themselves and that ever-advancing technology at their disposal remains a global challenge. It must be resisted that our strategic interest, together with the international structures we have created, be dismantled by diplomacy proportional to the weight of what we had before. We need to understand that no dramatic strategic move exists for the near future to engage the conflicts that we have arisen. Even with formal commitments to the states of the region, the America rush fosters frustration among allies and our opponents and causes confusion among observers. The Biden administration is still in its infancy. It must have the opportunity to develop and implement a long-term and comprehensive strategy that aligns with our domestic and international obligations. Democracies evolve into conflict between groups. Democracies achieve greatest through reconciliation. Former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice said on Sunday that the U.S. is safer than it was before the September 11th attacks, despite her concerns about America losing its eyes and ears in Afghanistan following President Biden's military withdrawal last month. During an appearance on CNN's State of the Union, Rice told host Dana Bash that the creation of the Homeland Security Department and the National Counterterrorism Center helped protect the U.S. from future attacks. Rice also trumpeted the dismantling of the terrorist organizations, Al-Qaeda, which carried out the 9/11 attacks. Denying them the territory of Afghanistan meant that they couldn't train and they couldn't operate in the way that they did on that day, she said. But Rice added that she would separate the successes of the past 20 years from the latest decision to end U.S. on-the-ground involvement in the country. The part that doesn't make sense to me, feel very comforting, is that we have lost our eyes and ears on the ground in Afghanistan that helped us to know where the terrorists were and that allowed us to run the kinds of operations that you sometimes have to run against terrorists, she said. Even so, she said the U.S. is still safer than it was before the 9/11 attacks. Now, Ms. Rice has used the statement that we're safer. I wholeheartedly disagree that we're safer in Afghanistan. And with that, I'll reserve the rest of my comments for the next show. Thank you. I appreciate your listening.
This show made possible in part by a grant from the law offices of Weiss Ortiz.